So we are finally putting our pencil to paper, but you'll notice that there's obviously a bit of a step-based build-up approach that I've laid this class out in. And that's simply because that's the approach that I follow and I think is most reasonable. The reality is drawing something really cool comes with a lot of pressure, and the more you want it to look good, the more pressure you put on yourself, and sometimes that can sort of be a barrier, which is why I find this stepped process really helpful. This rough sketching, the brainstorm sketch, is what I'm going to be covering in this lesson, and that really is a way to loosen up and take the pressure off. I'm just going to use my pencil, a colored pencil, and my eraser, and that's all I'm going to use for both of my illustrations in the brainstorm sketching phase. So we're going to start off with a bit of brainstorm sketching for our cuter, a little more stylistically simple illustration. I'll break down the process of the brainstorm sketching with you. And then once we've gone through that and its thumbnails, when we get to the more complex and ambitious image, you'll have an idea as to what I'm doing when I get more immersed into a little bit more of a demanding brainstorm sketching process. Now keep in mind, with both of these illustrations, brainstorm sketching sessions, my mood board is open off to the side, so I can reference it and just get some ideas and remind myself visually and aesthetically what I'm going for. And I really am just going to start off by scribbling. I don't need to be neat, I don't need to be orderly, I don't have any pressure that I'm going to do anything at all resembling what my final outcome will be. And as you can see, I'm really scribbly here. Now we might tighten up as we go, and that is a horrendous sketch, but guess what? It doesn't matter. If anything, it's good that I've just put the pencil down and drawn something horrible so that I can think, you know what? It's not going to get much worse than that. Let's just keep going. So I'm going to start off just thinking out the proportions of the characters I want to draw. I'm thinking big foreheads, and I don't know whether I want big eyes or little eyes, so I'll play with both. The general approach really is if you have a thought or a doubt or a question, you just put it down visually. Do I want to do a more two-dimensional face shape or something a bit more three-dimensional? Do I want to go bubbly or a little bit more blocky? The great thing about this is it acts as both an exploration and a warm-up. So as you brainstorm, you find you're naturally just getting a little bit sharper and a little bit more refined and a little clearer with every line that you draw. The other thing you'll notice is I'm really simplifying everything first. So I'm not drawing eyes or a nose or details. I'm starting off with the broad geometry very roughly. This is universal across every way of sketching, whether it be refined or rough. And then I'm bringing in the details once I have a rough idea of the shape or proportions and where I want to go from there. If something feels right, chase it. If it just doesn't feel right, move on. There really is no need to waste your time. It's just focusing on what feels right and developing that. So I'm starting to get some ideas coming together, but they're also in the same realm of how I tend to draw. So the great part of this process is you can start to push outside of your comfort zone because there is no wrong way of going about it, and you might discover things that work because you haven't tried them before. So I'm going to dedicate this whole page to just different stuff. Maybe I'll draw a face with entirely rigid angles. I don't know, let's do a character with entirely ridiculous proportions. Eyes half as big as the head, almost looks like Invader Zim. Tiny little mouth, big ears, low on the head. Big bubbly eyes. And that's actually not too bad. When I even it out with hair on the sides of the head, that looks pretty cool. I'm going to go really rounded with this one. Really little round cheeks, big forehead, little bubbly tufts of hair. Maybe for this one, I'll just go ultra simplistic. Little dots for eyes, tiny little eyebrows, little nose, little mouth. And to be honest, it is actually my favorite so far. I think the really simplistic approach is starting to capture that bubbly, cute, easygoing, carefree feeling I want in my illustration. So this is the direction I want to go in. And when I feel like that about one of my rough sketches, that's when I bring in my color pencil, because what I actually like to do is just draw a little shape behind it and color that in, almost framing my little sketch. And this is more just to give an embodiment to my thought process, more for myself than anything. So when I look through my sketches, I can see clearly where I've sort of framed or identified the things that I feel work best. So let's start to shape these two characters with that aesthetic in mind. Now you'll notice I'm still sketching quite scribbly, but my lines are getting a little more certain. It's not that I'm settling on anything in particular, but the style and the feeling of what I'm trying to capture is starting to take shape. And as a result, my drawings are naturally as well. I'm not telling myself to draw less scribbly, but I naturally am as I find my feet in the aesthetic that I'm really enjoying. And I feel like I'm in a place of enough clarity and confidence that I can move on to a few thumbnails. Now this is a really simple process, and it's the same sort of approach and style as your brainstorm sketches, except it's in the context of the construction of the image itself. The best way I find to do thumbnails is to literally draw out 4 pages on one page. That way you're forcing yourself to work in a little bit more of an enclosed area, and if you let yourself keep nice and rough, you know you have a few more attempts ahead of you, so unless you relax a little bit more with the one that you're on. And the first one should always be the first thing that comes to mind. If you have an illustration that you're already setting out to create, chances are by the time you're at this phase in the process, you have a picture in your head already. So for this first illustration, this is the rough composition that I had in my mind when I first conceptualized doing a cute, simple little picture of 2 kids playing in a sandpit. A front-on picture with them side by side in a fairly symmetrical scene, maybe something in the background like a fence, maybe a little cubby house back here, maybe a little swing set or something in the background, and a little dog over here on the side. So by getting that out there and then just putting it down, it just lets me release the first thing that I had in my head. I'm done, I've tried that, let's try something else. So perhaps with this shot, we'll go much closer. Essentially the same framing, but this time more of a mid shot of the 2 kids. I'm going to keep the action between these 2 characters the same in all of my different thumbnails, that the girl is helping fill the bucket that the boy is holding. So for this one, let's go a little bit different in the background. Maybe add a slightly angled perspective in the background rather than just keeping it all flat. And if I want to create something that pulls you in a bit more or feels a bit more like a scene of a little kids TV show or something like that, that might be the approach I'd take. Maybe I actually want to simplify it even more. What if we go back to our original idea and strip everything but the bare necessities? Maybe for this thumbnail, the focus is a little closer in and on the characters. We do want the environment, but let's keep it really simple and basically just allude to the background elements. Maybe there's just some simple shapes that might resemble a swing set, but we're not going to add some detail. We're just going to have some simple silhouettes. And then for our last example, let's really push ourselves a little bit further. At the moment, with all of our examples, it's front on with the 2 characters side by side. So let's switch it up a bit. Let's have our boy over here in the foreground, and he can be facing in this direction. And this time we've created some perspective. We've got the little boy and the dog in the foreground facing the girl in the midground. And maybe we can just have some shapes in the background alluding to the backyard that they're in. With your thumbnail sketches, you may want to explore more and push yourself further in different directions. This is a pretty straightforward concept, and I feel like after going through all of those, I most like this one. My simplistic background approach, a little bit more focus on the characters, but complementing the simplistic style that we're going for with the characters by simplifying the background, maybe even in a stylistically over-the-top way. So I've got a thumbnail I'm going to follow for my refined sketch. I've got a stylistic approach. I don't have it set in stone, but I have enough clarity and confidence to move forward on a refined sketch where I can find that last 10% of clarity to make the image exactly what I want. So I'm going to put this across to the side, and I will get to the refined sketch of this later in the next lesson. But it's time to move on to our slightly more complicated characters and scene. Even though both pieces will end up completely different in complexity and aesthetic, the approach to get to the end result is exactly the same. So I begin my process by brainstorm sketching out Davin, the champion of Thenicia. There's very little I know about him other than that he's our protagonist, he is noble, and he's wearing armor. So I kept my brainstorm sketches really loose and played around with as many visual ideas as I could, just trying to tick off those boxes. I started off by focusing on the face, and once I felt like I had a decent foundation for our heroic character, I moved on to a few of the body parts and armor pieces. At the point that Davin's characteristics and proportions and costumes started to feel like they were shaping together, I moved on to our Voth character. Starting off with a few old guy barbarian faces, I actually found that giving him a sort of a long mohawk or just some hair at the top of his head that could flow in front of his face might add to the drama of the scene, especially if the tower is quite high. I might want it to look windy and unstable. And the hair of this character was probably a way to communicate that, as well as make him look a little bit more mysterious and looming. I found that a slightly more primitive approach to Voth's costume was beneficial, especially given that the tribe that he's from has a lot of wooden towers. It stands to reason that his clothing is probably consisting of just leathers and pelts. Occasional pieces of metal maybe, but much more ropes and animals and wraps and all that stuff. And before moving on to the thumbnails, of course, the tower itself has to be treated a bit like a character. How much space is on the tower? What shape is it? What's the silhouette like? What are its proportions? All of these things will contribute to how intense the scene feels and what the culture of the Krogatharian people looks like. Now, when it was time to move on to the thumbnails, it made it pretty clear that I'd set myself up for a challenge. My first thumbnail was really flat, and I approached it that way, basically starting off safe and getting more extreme from there. It was basically an eye-level front-on view from the perspective of the top of the tower, seeing Voth looming over Davin. In my second thumbnail, I got a little bit more ambitious and thought I would have a bit of a perspective from below the tower looking up, as if Davin was about to be pushed off of the edge, which would make it clearer that he's losing. Thumbnails 3 and 4 are where I really started to feel like I was getting that dynamic. The third being more from the perspective of Davin, in that we're under the battle scene and being dominated by Voth. And while I felt like this was a really cool perspective for the scene to take place in, I didn't know if the sky was a little bit too empty and it didn't really feel like we were at the top of a tower. In thumbnail 4, I feel like I started to see all of the elements come together. Voth was turned slightly towards our perspective in that he's holding the axe ready to take a final strike at Davin. So the scene we're seeing allows us to see that Davin is losing, he's about to be struck off of the tower, and we can also see over the edge of the tower where I plan to have lots of other city elements of the barbarian tribe and also maybe some of those tribes' people cheering Voth on. So I certainly feel like after going through this whole process, I have something that I can anchor myself to and work with clarity from. Specifically thumbnail 4, I really feel like I've got a scene that's going to have a lot of impact. So now that we've all gone through that process, we have everything we need to start off with our final artwork. Keep your rough sketches as a reference for when you start your refined sketch. But at this point, now that we're ready to start our refined sketch, we can pace ourselves and take our time with our final piece.
I love it when my friends see my characters and they empathize with them, they relate to them, and it holds a special place in their heart. In this lesson, we're going to talk about faces and expressions, things featuring the eyes and the mouth. So the reason why expressions and emotions are highly important in animation is because animation is a very expressive form of medium, and characters express and emote with, facial expressions or poses. So with that in mind, we're going to draw different expressions for our characters. I want to draw 5 expressions because I have these 5 expressions in mind that are great for just character design in general. So the first one is neutral. This means a character in their resting expression. It's just a very standard resting emotion. And then the second one will be our character happy. Next one will be our character angry. And then the last 2 are sad and surprised. Now, let's start with our neutral expression. So this means this character in its resting pose. So you can be creative depending on what your character design is. Maybe the character only shows its eyes, There's no mouth yet. And this is a creative decision that I'm working with. And this is where it's like limbs will go. Okay, neutral. Now let's look at happy. What would that look like? And when I do expressions, I like to whip out my phone or a mirror, set the camera on selfie mode, and just practice expressions. Just to see those subtle nuances my face is making. And this is gonna help me give clues on how to draw some of these shapes. So when I look at myself and I do happy, I notice that my eyes kind of squint a bit. And it was closed like going upwards. So I'm gonna give that robot squinty eyes with an arc going upwards. And then maybe a mouth. I'm thinking, should the mouth be wide open? Or should it be closed like this? I want to do wide. I think that's super clear to me. You decide. All right, so now I'm going to go for, what's my next expression? Angry. Okay, I'm just gonna take pictures of my face doing all these expressions right now. So angry. Next is sad. Okay, surprised. I think those three are pretty important. You know, I might take liberties with these expressions because I'm human, so I have limitations. I also have big cheeks, and that also prevents me from like expressing the corners of my mouth. So I'm going to cheat that a bit. I would also recommend you to use other references too. So I don't have any references loaded up, but if you have like, let's say your favorite cartoons or animation, load up expressions of those characters on a separate screen and use that as a guide to sort of figure out what kind of shapes that you want for your character design. So let's do angry. Okay, this character doesn't have a nose, but noses sell the angry expressions really well. But I noticed that my eyebrows go down, and this is a decision that you might have to make. And that's the problem solving of character design too. It's like, what's appropriate? Because, you know, I can get away with the eyes slanted like this. This feels pretty angry to me. But then I can also sell even more by like adding brows to it. And I noticed that there's a tension on my eyebrows to really, really sell that. And I noticed that one of my lips is quivering up to sell that asymmetry. And there's tense there too. So we have a version of an angry expression. And again, this is where the limbs will go. Okay, that's angry. And then the next one, sad. I know when I'm sad, my head drops. And if I was drawing this character's shoulders, like that also plays a role in the expressions. When I'm angry, I tense up. When I'm sad, I drop down. And you know, shoulders help sell the attitude and expressions of things. So sad. Let's see what that looks like. Eyes arching down. Eyebrows sort of tense. And when I do tension, I really indicate the creases of the lines or the little muscles in my eyebrows to really help solve that. And then the character's mouth arching downwards. I could even sell this even more by being a bit more creative. Let's say I give this character a teardrop. Because, I mean, it's got a very graphic user interface for a face. All right, now let's do surprise. So for this last expression, I could be experimental and maybe have the head stretch, just like my head is stretching in my reference. You notice that my head is a bit tilted, but one thing for sure is that my eyes are just like fully open. And I'll use the shape of my own mouth for my reference to show that. I mean, I could like break design a bit and make it really wide. And just keep playing with those shapes. And there we have it. We have very rough versions of some of these expressions. So I want to show you the expressions I did for the samurai character. The samurai character is human, so it was easy for me to reference this character because there's a lot of similarities with my face and his face. But I also got to be a bit more playful and expressive with the eyebrows and the mustache that this character has. Like if, let's say, a character is startled, the mustache goes all frenzied. And when it's sad, maybe the mustache drops down. But all of these expressions that I have all come from a place where I'm looking at myself and studying from life. One of my favorite parts about character design is just doing facial expressions because you can get really, really specific with them. So I'm going to load up some examples of that, of what I've done in the past. So again, I've explored different styles of animation. Some of them are more realistic, some of them are more detailed, some of them are a lot more cartoony, for example. So I'm gonna load that up. Some of them are just are playful. Sometimes I'm dealing with characters that are not human. So you also have to be creative with how can you show believable human-like expressions to a character that's not human. So you have to really think about that problem-solving element that I kept talking about earlier. Just a bunch of different explorations of my characters. So doing expressions or expressions in general are important for characters because characters emote, they have feelings, and they have to be able to show that visually. Some characters show it differently than others. Some characters are more exaggerated than others. But what's important is that when characters express and when they achieve a goal, they express, when they interact with each other, there's so many different emotions being expressed, and that communicates story.